Rain hammers against bulletproof glass. 40 stories above Manhattan. In the shadows of a marble palace, a pregnant woman's trembling fingers turn the pages of her husband's secret journal, each word a dagger, each sentence a death warrant. Some betrayals cut deep, others cut to the bone. But the cruelest betrayals are the ones that smile at you over breakfast while planning your funeral by dinner. They say love conquers all. They're wrong. Love makes you vulnerable. Love makes you trust. Love makes you believe that the man who whispers forever in your ear isn't the same man writing your obituary in his private thoughts. But here's what they don't tell you about betrayal. It doesn't just destroy who you were. Sometimes if you're strong enough, smart enough, angry enough, it forges you into something far more dangerous than your enemies ever imagined. This is the story of a woman who discovered that her fairy tale was actually a nightmare. And what she did about it will remind you why hell hath no fury like a brilliant woman with nothing left to lose. The reckoning is coming, and it will be beautiful. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse like nature's own percussion section, creating a symphony that Isabella Wellington had grown to love during her 7 months of pregnancy. She stood in the marble-floored foyer of what most people would call a palace, a $50 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, complete with an infinity pool, private elevator, and enough space to house a small village. But tonight, this palace felt more like a prison. Isabella's delicate fingers traced the curve of her swollen belly as she watched her husband Marcus through the glass doors leading to his private study. At 35, Marcus Wellington was everything the magazines said. He was devastatingly handsome, ruthlessly intelligent, and wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams. His real estate empire spanned from New York to Los Angeles. His hotel chain bore the family name, and his net worth had just crossed the $3 billion mark. And he was hers, or so she thought. Mrs. Wellington, came the soft voice of Maria, their longtime housekeeper. Mr. Wellington said he'll be working late again tonight. Should I prepare dinner for one? Isabella's heart sank, though she tried to hide it behind a gentle smile. Yes, Maria, thank you. This was the fourth night this week that Marcus had buried himself in his study, claiming urgent business matters that couldn't wait. The same urgent business that required hushed phone calls at midnight, mysterious text messages that made him smile in ways that used to be reserved for her, and cologne that smelled different when he came home sweeter, more floral, distinctly feminine. As Maria disappeared into the kitchen, Isabella found herself drawn to Marcus's study. The mahogany door stood slightly ajar, and she could hear him on the phone, his voice low and intimate in a way that made her stomach clench with something far worse than morning sickness. No, darling, she doesn't suspect anything, Marcus was saying, his back to the door as he stared out at the glittering city lights. Yes, I know it's difficult, but we have to be patient just a little longer. Once the baby comes, we can move forward with our plans. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Marcus would hear it, even from across the room. Vivian, you know I love you, Marcus continued, and the name hit Isabella like a physical blow. Isabella is just, well, she's serving her purpose. Once she gives me an heir, we won't need her anymore. The words carved through Isabella like a blade. 7 months of carrying his child, 3 years of marriage, 5 years of being together, and she was just serving a purpose. I've already started moving assets to the offshore accounts we discussed, Marcus said, turning slightly so Isabella could see his profile. He looked relaxed, almost happy, in a way he hadn't looked at her in months. By the time the divorce papers are filed, she'll be lucky to get pocket change. Isabella's legs felt weak. She gripped the door frame to steady herself, fighting the urge to storm in and confront him. But something deeper, more calculating, held her back. If Marcus was planning to destroy her, she needed to know exactly how. The penthouse will be yours, of course, Marcus continued, his voice filled with the kind of tenderness he used to reserve for her. I can't wait to see you redecorating. Maybe something more. Modern Isabella's taste has always been a bit too traditional for my liking. Too traditional. Isabella had spent months working with the city's most exclusive interior designers to create a home that reflected both their tastes. Every piece of furniture, every work of art, every carefully chosen accent had been selected with love and attention to detail that would have made Architectural Digest weep with envy. Yes, I'll handle the legal side, Marcus said. My lawyer assures me that the prenup is ironclad. She signed it without reading it properly, typical Isabella, always trusting everyone to have her best interests at heart. The prenup. Isabella remembered signing it on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life, just hours before their wedding ceremony. Marcus had presented it to her with roses and champagne, explaining that it was just a formality, something his lawyers insisted on. She had trusted him completely, signing with the same blind faith that had defined their entire relationship. Don't worry about the baby, Marcus said, and Isabella's blood turned to ice. I'll make sure I get full custody. A child needs stability. And Isabella, well, let's just say we can make a case that she's not fit to be a mother. Not fit to be a mother, Isabella's hand moved protectively to her belly, where their son was growing strong and healthy. She had given up her promising career as an architect, her independence, her dreams, all to create the perfect family life Marcus claimed to want. I have to go, Marcus said suddenly. She might come looking for me, and we can't have her getting suspicious now. I love you, Vivian. Just a few more months, and we can be together properly. Isabella heard the phone click off and quickly moved away from the door, her mind reeling. She made it to the guest bathroom just in time before her knees gave out completely. Sitting on the marble floor, she wrapped her arms around her belly and tried to process what she had just heard. Marcus didn't love her. He never had. She was just a means to an end, a way to produce an heir and provide cover for his real relationship. And Vivian. Who was Vivian? The name sounded familiar, tugging at the edges of her memory. Where had she heard it before? Then it hit her like a lightning bolt. Vivian Ross, the stunning model and aspiring actress who had been featured in several high-profile magazine spreads over the past year. Isabella had actually complimented Marcus on hiring her for the Wellington Hotel's advertising campaign, praising her beauty and poise. Marcus had smiled that day, that secretive smile she now understood all too well. She's certainly memorable, he had said. Memorable. Isabella almost laughed at the cruel irony of it all. As she sat there on the cold marble floor, something inside Isabella began to shift. The devastation and heartbreak were still there, burning like acid in her chest. But underneath it, something else was growing. Something harder, more determined. Marcus thought she was weak, trusting, naive. He thought he could discard her like an old piece of furniture once she had served her purpose. He had no idea what he was dealing with. Isabella had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with a degree in architecture. She had built her own successful firm before meeting Marcus, designed buildings that still stood as testaments to her skill and vision. She wasn't the helpless, decorative wife Marcus apparently believed her to be. She was a problem solver, a strategist, a creator who could envision complex structures and bring them to life. And right now, she was going to create the most important project of her life, Marcus Wellington's downfall. But first, she needed information. 3 days later, Isabella implemented the first phase of her plan. She waited until Marcus left for his weekly golf game, though she now suspected he was really meeting Vivian, and made her way to his study. The room was a shrine to masculine power, dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, awards and photographs documenting Marcus's rise to the top of the real estate world. But Isabella was looking for something more personal, more damaging. She started with his desk, methodically searching through drawers that she had never dared to open before. Most contained business documents, contracts, and correspondence that would bore most people to tears. But Isabella's trained eye caught inconsistencies, payments to shell companies, transactions that didn't quite add up. money moving in ways that didn't match the official books. Then, in the bottom drawer of his antique mahogany desk, her fingers found something unexpected, a hidden compartment. The architect in her recognized the craftsmanship immediately. This wasn't original to the desk. Someone had modified it specifically to create a secret hiding place. Inside the compartment was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Marcus's distinctive handwriting. Isabella's hands trembled as she opened it and began to read. March 15th. Vivian was incredible last night at the Ritz. The way she moves, the way she makes me feel. It's everything Isabella isn't. I can't believe I've wasted 3 years pretending to be satisfied with mediocrity. Vivian understands power, understands what it means to really live. Isabella just wants to play house and talk about baby furniture. The words hit Isabella like physical blows, but she forced herself to keep reading. March 22nd. Transferred another $5 million to the Cayman account today. Vivian's expensive tastes are worth every penny. She deserves to be spoiled, to have everything she wants. Unlike Isabella, who's grateful for everything like some kind of grateful puppy. God, the way she thanked me for that necklace last week made me want to vomit. April 1st. Vivian wants me to speed up the timeline. She's right, of course. Why should we wait once the baby is born and I have my heir? There's no reason to keep pretending this marriage is anything more than a business arrangement. My lawyers say the custody case will be easy. Isabella has no real resources of her own, no family support system. She'll be lucky to get supervised visitation. April 8th. Had dinner with Senator Morrison tonight. He hinted that there might be ways to make the divorce even more favorable if I play my cards right. Apparently, there are precedents for declaring someone an unfit mother based on postpartum depression. All it takes is the right medical expert and some creative interpretation of behaviors. Isabella's always been emotional. It won't be hard to build a case. April 15th. Vivian's idea about the house is brilliant. If we can get Isabella to move out voluntarily, it will look better in court. Vivian suggests making her so uncomfortable that she leaves on her own. I told her she has carte blanche to redecorate, to change whatever she wants. Watching Isabella's face when she realizes her precious home is being stripped away will be almost as satisfying as watching her face when I serve her with papers. Isabella's hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the journal. Each entry was more devastating than the last, revealing the depth of Marcus's deception and the calculating cruelty of his plans. But it was the most recent entry that stopped her heart completely. April 20th. Dr. Matthews agrees that there are certain medications that could be helpful during the delivery. Nothing that would harm the baby, of course, but something that might affect Isabella's mental state afterward. If she has what appears to be a psychotic break or severe postpartum depression, the custody case becomes a formality. Vivian's been researching the symptoms we'd need to document. She's more devious than I gave her credit for. Isabella stared at the page, reading the words over and over again, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Marcus was planning to drug her during childbirth to make her appear mentally unstable. He was going to steal her child and destroy her reputation, all so he could be with his mistress. The sound of the front door slamming jolted Isabella back to reality. Marcus was home early. "Isabella," his voice called out, and she could hear the artificial warmth he always used when he was putting on a show. "Where are you, darling?" Isabella quickly photographed the journal pages with her phone, her fingers flying over the screen as she captured evidence of Marcus's betrayal. She had just managed to return the journal to its hiding place and close the drawer when she heard footsteps approaching the study. "There you are," Marcus said, appearing in the doorway with what looked like a genuine smile. "I was hoping we could spend some time together this evening. Maybe order from that Italian place you like." Looking at him now, knowing what she knew, Isabella marveled at how convincing he was. If she hadn't heard the phone call, if she hadn't read his journal, she might actually believe that he cared about her. "That sounds lovely," she managed to say, forcing herself to smile back. "I was just admiring your awards again. You've accomplished so much." Marcus preened under the praise, just as he always did. Well, success doesn't come without sacrifice, but it's all been worth it for moments like this coming home to my beautiful wife and our child. Our child, the possessive pronoun made Isabella's skin crawl. Marcus didn't see their baby as their shared joy and responsibility. He saw him as his heir, his property, his genetic legacy. She was just the vessel that had carried his prize. I should go freshen up before dinner, Isabella said, needing to escape before she said something that would give away her newfound knowledge. As she headed toward the door, Marcus caught her wrist gently. Isabella, you know I love you. Right? You and the baby are everything to me. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly, with such practiced sincerity, that Isabella almost gasped. Instead, she looked up at him, with the same trusting expression she had always worn. I love you too, Marcus, more than anything. He kissed her forehead with the kind of tender affection that had once made her feel like the luckiest woman in the world. Now it made her feel like she was being branded with his ownership. As Isabella walked to their bedroom, where he had held her and whispered promises of forever that he had never meant, she felt something crystallizing inside her chest. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't just hurt, though the pain threatened to crush her. It was determination. Cold, hard, unshakable determination. Marcus thought he was playing chess with a pawn. He had no idea he was actually facing a grandmaster. The next morning, Isabella stood at the window of their bedroom, watching Marcus's chauffeur-driven Bentley disappear into the Manhattan traffic. She had kissed him goodbye at the door, wished him luck with his important meeting with investors, and promised to spend the day resting. Instead, she was about to begin the most important work of her life. But first, she had a visitor to deal with. The sound of a key turning in the front door made Isabella's pulse spike with adrenaline. Marcus was supposed to be gone for the entire day, but someone else clearly had access to their home. Isabella positioned herself at the top of the marble staircase, hidden from view but able to see the foyer below. The front door opened, and a woman stepped inside with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Vivian Ross was even more stunning in person than in her photographs. Tall and willowy, with platinum blonde hair that caught the light like spun silver and legs that seemed to go on for miles. She moved through Isabella's home like she already owned it. She was carrying several shopping bags from high-end boutiques and what appeared to be fabric samples. Maria, Vivian called out in a voice that was pure honey and steel. I'm here to start the redecorating project, Mr. Wellington discussed with you. We'll be making some changes to the master bedroom and living areas. Isabella's blood turned to ice. Redecorating project. Marcus hadn't mentioned any such thing to her. Maria appeared from the kitchen, looking confused and uncomfortable. Miss Ross, I think there might be some mistake. Mrs. Wellington hasn't mentioned any redecorating. Vivian's laugh was like crystal breaking. Oh, Maria, dear, Mrs. Wellington won't be concerning herself with decorating decisions much longer. Mr. Wellington has asked me to take over the aesthetic direction of the home. Don't worry, your job is secure. We'll just be making some updates to better reflect Mr. Wellington's true tastes. Isabella watched in horror as Vivian began walking through the lower level of their home, pointing at furniture and artwork with dismissive gestures. This couch is so dowdy, Vivian said, running her finger along the back of the custom Italian leather sofa that Isabella had spent weeks selecting. And these colors so boring and traditional. Mr. Wellington specifically said he wants something more sophisticated, more modern. But Miss Ross, Maria protested, Mrs. Wellington chose all of these pieces herself. They're her favorites. Exactly, Vivian said with a smile that could have cut glass. Which is why they have to go. Isabella gripped the marble banister so tightly her knuckles went white. She watched as Vivian pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of various rooms, making notes about what needed to be updated or replaced. Then Vivian did something that made Isabella's vision go red around the edges. She walked over to the mantelpiece where Isabella's most treasured possessions were displayed photos from their wedding. A sculpture Marcus had given her for their first anniversary, a small framed ultrasound picture of their unborn son. Vivian picked up the ultrasound photo and stared at it for a long moment, her perfectly sculpted features twisting into an expression of disgust. "This will definitely have to go," she said, tossing the frame carelessly into a nearby wastebasket. "So tacky." The frame hit the bottom of the basket with a soft thud, and something inside Isabella snapped. Before she realized what she was doing, Isabella was walking down the stairs, her hand trailing along the banister for support, her 8-month pregnant belly leading the way. "Excuse me," Isabella said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority she had once used with construction crews and difficult clients. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Vivian spun around, her eyes widening in surprise before quickly narrowing with calculation. Up close, she was even more beautiful, but there was something cold and reptilian in her green eyes that made Isabella's skin crawl. "Oh," Vivian said, her tone suggesting that Isabella was an unwelcome interruption. "You must be Isabella. I'm Vivian Ross. Marcus asked me to help with some improvements to the house." "Improvements," Isabella repeated slowly, walking over to retrieve the ultrasound photo from the wastebasket. "And these improvements include throwing away pictures of our unborn child." Vivian's perfect smile never wavered. "I'm sure it was just an accident. I'm not used to working around so much. Clutter." Clutter. Isabella's entire life, reduced to clutter. "I see," Isabella said, studying Vivian with the same analytical gaze she had once used to assess structural problems in buildings. "And how long have you been working with my husband on these improvements?" Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Triumph, maybe, or cruelty. "Oh, Marcus and I have been collaborating for quite some time now. He has such exquisite taste. Don't you think much more sophisticated than most people realize?" The insult was carefully wrapped in pleasantries, but Isabella heard it clearly. Vivian was telling her that Marcus preferred sophistication over whatever Isabella represented. "I'm sure you're right," Isabella said, her voice still calm and measured. "Marcus does appreciate quality." But Vivian's smile grew sharper. "He certainly does, which is why he asked me to handle this project personally. He wants everything to be perfect well, for the future. For the future. The future that didn't include Isabella." "How thoughtful of him," Isabella said. "I hope you'll excuse me, I have a doctor's appointment. Please feel free to continue with your assessment." Isabella turned and walked back toward the stairs, feeling Vivian's eyes boring into her back. She could practically hear the other woman's thoughts. Boring, weak, soon to be replaced. But as Isabella climbed the stairs, her hand once again came to rest on her belly, and she felt her son respond with a strong kick, as if he too sensed the danger surrounding them. "Just wait," Isabella thought, her lips curving in a smile that would have surprised Vivian with its coldness. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." That afternoon, Isabella sat in her car outside Dr. Sarah Chen's office, staring at her phone. She had taken dozens of pictures of Marcus's journal, each one more damning than the last. She had video of Vivian in their home, talking about replacing Isabella's clutter with something more sophisticated. But she needed more. She needed help. Dr. Chen had been Isabella's obstetrician since the beginning of her pregnancy, and over the months, they had developed the kind of relationship that went beyond just medical care. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s who had built her practice around supporting women through one of the most vulnerable times in their lives. She was smart, compassionate, and Isabella suspected not easily fooled by powerful men who thought they could manipulate the system. "Isabella," Dr. Chen said as she entered the examination room, "you look different today, more tense. Is everything all right?" Isabella had planned to keep this appointment routine, to avoid raising any suspicions. But sitting there on the examination table, looking at Dr. Chen's kind face. She found herself breaking down completely. Dr. Chen, she said, tears streaming down her face. I think my husband is trying to hurt me. I think he's planning to take my baby away. Dr. Chen immediately moved to Isabella's side, her professional demeanor shifting to one of fierce protectiveness. Tell me everything, she said simply. So Isabella did. She showed Dr. Chen the photos of Marcus's journal, played the recording she had made of his phone conversation with Vivian, and described what had happened with Vivian in their home. When she finished, Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her face grave. Isabella, she said finally, I need to tell you something that I probably should have mentioned before. Dr. Matthews, the physician Marcus suggested for your delivery, approached me last week with some very unusual questions about medications that could be administered during labor. Isabella's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? He wanted to know about drugs that might cause temporary disorientation or confusion in new mothers. He claimed it was for a research project, but Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. In 30 years of practice, I've never had a colleague ask those kinds of questions for legitimate research purposes. Oh my God, Isabella whispered. He's really going to do it. Marcus is really going to try to make me look crazy so he can take my baby. Dr. Chen's jaw set in a hard line. Not if I have anything to say about it. Isabella, what you've shown me suggests that your husband is planning to commit several serious crimes. We need to get you help. But who's going to believe me? Isabella asked desperately. Marcus is a billionaire. He has connections everywhere. I'm just his pregnant wife with no resources of my own. You're not powerless, Dr. Chen said firmly. And you're not alone. I know someone who can help. That someone turned out to be Elena Rodriguez, one of the most feared investigative journalists in New York. Elena specialized in exposing corruption among the wealthy and powerful, and she had built her reputation on taking down men who thought their money made them untouchable. Mrs. Wellington, Elena said when they met at a small cafe in Queens the next day, Dr. Chen has told me about your situation. I have to say, if what you've uncovered is true, this could be one of the biggest stories I've ever worked on. Elena was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an intensity that made Isabella understand why powerful men feared her. She looked at the evidence Isabella had gathered with the focused attention of a predator studying its prey. Your husband has made several critical mistakes, Elena said, scrolling through the photos of Marcus's journal. First, he documented everything. Second, he underestimated you. And third, he chose the wrong mistress. What do you mean? Isabella asked. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. Vivian Ross isn't just a model and aspiring actress. She's a professional grifter. I've been tracking her for months as part of a larger investigation into marriage fraud among the wealthy. She's done this before at least 3 times that I can prove. Isabella stared at Elena in shock. She's done this before. Oh yes, the pattern is always the same. She targets wealthy married men, convinces them to leave their wives, gets them to transfer assets to her, and then disappears. The difference is that her previous targets were smart enough to keep things quiet to avoid embarrassment. But your husband, Elena chuckled coldly. Your husband is so arrogant he's documenting his own crimes. So what do we do? Isabella asked. Elena leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. We're going to destroy them both, and we're going to do it in the most public way possible. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of careful planning and covert intelligence gathering. Isabella had become someone she hardly recognized: a strategist, a spy, a woman capable of sitting across from her husband at dinner and making pleasant conversation while secretly recording everything he said. The transformation wasn't just mental, it was physical too. Where once she had moved through their penthouse with the careful, almost apologetic steps of someone who felt like a guest in her own home, now she walked with purpose. Her pregnancy, which Marcus and Vivian seemed to view as a weakness, had become her strength. People didn't suspect a pregnant woman of being dangerous. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Elena had been true to her word, diving into Vivian's background with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. What she discovered painted a picture of a woman who was far more dangerous than even Isabella had imagined. Her real name is Victoria Reynolds. Elena explained during one of their meetings in a small, discreet office Elena used for sensitive cases. She's originally from Ohio, dropped out of college to pursue modeling, and has been running long cons on wealthy men for at least 7 years. Elena spread photographs across the table: police reports, wedding photos, bank statements that told a story of systematic fraud. Victim number 1 was Theodore Ashworth, oil executive from Texas. She convinced him to divorce his wife of 20 years and transfer $12 million to various accounts before disappearing. Victim number 2 was Dr. Richard Blackstone, a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills. She got $8 million from him. Victim number 3 was James Morrison. Yes, the senator your husband mentioned in his journal. Isabella stared at the photos, her mind reeling. Senator Morrison was one of her victims. Former Senator Morrison, Elena corrected with a grim smile. His career didn't survive the scandal when his wife went public with what Vivian had done to their family. That's actually how I first became aware of our Miss Ross. Mrs. Morrison was one of my sources for a story about political corruption. So Vivian Victoria, whatever her name is, she's done this before, Isabella said slowly. But why is she targeting Marcus? He's not exactly keeping this affair secret. Everyone seems to know about it. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. That's what's different this time. Usually Victoria works in the shadows, manipulates her targets into thinking the affair is their idea, their secret. But with Marcus, she's being bold, public. She's acting like she's already won. Because she has, Isabella said bitterly. Marcus is planning to divorce me anyway. She doesn't need to hide. Exactly, which means she's gotten careless, overconfident. And that, Elena said with satisfaction, is when people like Victoria make mistakes. Hot. The mistake came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days later, Isabella was in the penthouse nursery, putting finishing touches on the room she had designed for their son, when she heard voices coming from the living room below. Marcus was supposed to be in a board meeting until evening, but she could clearly hear his voice, along with Vivian's higher-pitched tones. Isabella moved quietly to the top of the stairs, her heart pounding with the familiar mixture of dread and anticipation that had become her constant companion. Needs to happen faster, Vivian was saying, her voice sharp with impatience. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending. When are you going to grow a spine and handle this situation? Vivian, please, Marcus replied, and Isabella was surprised by the pleading note in his voice. In all their years together, she had never heard Marcus sound so submissive. We discussed this after the baby is born, after the custody arrangements are finalized. It has to look legitimate. Legitimate, Vivian's laugh was harsh. Marcus, darling, we're talking about stealing a woman's child and destroying her life. There's nothing legitimate about any of this. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Hearing Vivian state their plans so bluntly was somehow more shocking than reading about them in Marcus's journal. Besides, Vivian continued, I have another idea. Something that would solve all our problems much more. Permanently. What do you mean? Marcus asked, and Isabella could hear the wariness in his voice. Well, childbirth is such a dangerous time, Vivian said, her tone conversational, almost casual. Complications happen, tragic accidents, and if poor Isabella didn't survive the delivery, well, you'd be a grieving widower with a newborn son who needs a mother figure. Someone like me. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella gripped the banister so tightly she thought it might crack under the pressure. Vivian, Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Vivian said smoothly. I'm simply pointing out that nature sometimes solves problems in ways that human planning cannot. Dr. Matthews has already agreed to be very flexible in his treatment approach, and accidents do happen in delivery rooms. Isabella's vision went gray around the edges. They weren't just planning to take her child. They were planning to kill her. I need to think about this, Marcus stammered. Of course you do, Vivian purred. Take all the time you need. Just remember that every day we wait is another day that Isabella might figure out what's happening. And we can't have that. Can we? Isabella heard movement below and quickly retreated to the nursery, her mind reeling. She sat down hard in the rocking chair she had bought to nurse her son, staring at the mobile of airplanes and clouds that hung over the crib. They were going to kill her, the man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her life and her future, was planning her murder. But even as the horror of it washed over her, Isabella felt that familiar surge of cold determination. If Marcus and Vivian thought they could dispose of her like an inconvenient problem, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. She pulled out her phone and called Elena. We need to move up our timeline, Isabella said without preamble when Elena answered. They're planning to kill me during the delivery. Elena's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone. Are you certain? I just heard them discussing it. Elena, they're going to murder me and make it look like a medical complication. Then we end this now, Elena said, her voice hard as steel. Isabella, are you ready to burn it all down? Isabella looked around the nursery she had lovingly created, at the tiny clothes hanging in the closet, at the stuffed animals waiting for the little boy who would never know his father as anything but a monster. Yes, she said simply. I'm ready. Elena's plan was ambitious, risky, and absolutely perfect. Truth Revealed was one of the most popular daytime talk shows in America, known for explosive revelations and dramatic confrontations that made headlines for weeks. The show's host, David Sterling, had built his career on exposing the dark secrets of the rich and famous, and he had no love for entitled billionaires who thought they were above consequences. He'll want exclusivity, Elena warned as they sat in her office, planning the details. Once we give him this story, we can't take it back. This will be completely public, completely irreversible. Good, Isabella said firmly. I want everyone to see exactly who Marcus Wellington really is. Elena had already reached out to her contacts at the show, providing just enough information to pique their interest without revealing the full scope of the story. David Sterling's producers were practically salivating at the prospect of exposing a billionaire's marriage fraud live on national television. The show tapes this Friday, Elena said. That gives us 4 days to finalize everything. Marcus and Vivian think they're going to be doing a puff piece about successful couples and the importance of love in business. They have no idea what's waiting for them. Isabella's due date was still 2 weeks away, but Dr. Chen had assured her that the stress of the confrontation wouldn't harm the baby. In fact, Dr. Chen had agreed to be at the studio, ready to provide medical care if needed and to serve as a witness to Marcus's planned medical malpractice. There's one more thing, Elena said, her expression growing serious. I've been in contact with Victoria's previous victims, Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Blackstone's ex-wife, and Theodore Ashworth's daughter. They want to be there. At the taping, Isabella asked, they want to confront her publicly. They want the world to see that they weren't the only ones, that this is a pattern of behavior. Isabella, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about justice for everyone Victoria has destroyed. Isabella felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. She was part of something bigger, something that could prevent Victoria from ever hurting another family. Wednesday evening, 2 days before the taping, Isabella sat in her living room pretending to read a pregnancy book while Marcus worked on his laptop nearby. He had been unusually attentive over the past few days, bringing her flowers, ordering from her favorite restaurants, even suggesting they spend a quiet weekend together after the television appearance. If she hadn't known about his plans, she might have thought he was finally stepping up as an expectant father. Now, his kindness felt like the courtesy an executioner might show to a condemned prisoner. Isabella, Marcus said suddenly, looking up from his laptop, I was thinking about Friday's show. Maybe it would be better if you didn't participate. Television can be stressful, and with the baby coming so soon, Isabella looked up from her book, careful to keep her expression neutral. But Marcus, this is supposed to be about our marriage, about our success as a couple. How would it look if I wasn't there? Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I just think it might be too much for you in your condition. Nonsense, Isabella said with a bright smile. I'm feeling wonderful. Besides, I'm looking forward to talking about our love story. Their love story. The phrase tasted like ashes in her mouth, but Marcus seemed to relax at her apparent enthusiasm. Of course, he said, his smile returning. Our love story. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect New York day that made everything seem possible. Isabella stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying makeup with the kind of precision she had once reserved for architectural drawings. Today, she was not just Isabella Wellington, pregnant wife and soon-to-be victim. Today, she was an architect of justice, and she was about to construct the most important building of her career, the complete destruction of Marcus Wellington's life. She chose her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that flattered her pregnant figure while projecting strength and competence. Pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, and the wedding ring that had once symbolized love and trust, but now served as evidence of the greatest deception of her life. You look beautiful, Marcus said as they prepared to leave for the studio. He kissed her cheek with what appeared to be genuine affection, and Isabella marveled once again at his ability to compartmentalize his emotions. In just a few hours, he would be implementing a plan that could result in her death. But right now, he could kiss her goodbye and tell her she looked beautiful, as if nothing had changed between them. Thank you, Isabella replied, straightening his tie with the kind of wifely attention she had always shown him. Are you nervous? Not at all, Marcus said with his characteristic confidence. We have nothing to hide, nothing to hide. If Isabella hadn't been so focused on maintaining her facade, she might have laughed out loud. The studio for Truth Revealed was exactly what Isabella had expected: bright lights, multiple cameras, and an atmosphere of barely contained energy that suggested anything could happen. David Sterling himself came to greet them in the green room, his famous smile as sharp as a blade. Mr. and Mrs. Wellington, he said, shaking their hands warmly. Thank you so much for being here today. I think our viewers are going to find your story absolutely fascinating. There was something in the way he said fascinating that made Isabella's pulse quicken with anticipation. But Marcus seemed oblivious to any undercurrents. We're happy to be here, Marcus said, slipping easily into his public persona. Isabella and I believe that successful relationships require work, commitment, and absolute honesty with each other. Absolute honesty. Isabella had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from reacting. Vivian arrived 20 minutes later, looking stunning in a red dress that clung to her model-perfect figure. She greeted Marcus with a kiss on both cheeks that lasted just a fraction too long to be purely professional, and nodded politely to Isabella as if they were casual acquaintances rather than two women whose lives were about to collide in the most spectacular way possible. Mrs. Wellington, Vivian said with that perfectly practiced smile, you're absolutely glowing. Pregnancy suits you so well. Thank you, Isabella replied evenly. You look lovely as well. That dress is stunning. This old thing, Vivian laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. I just threw it on at the last minute. The casual lie was so smooth, so effortless, that Isabella almost admired Vivian's skill. The dress had clearly been chosen specifically for its dramatic impact on television, probably by a professional stylist who specialized in crisis management appearances. But then Isabella looked into Vivian's eyes and saw something that made her blood run cold: anticipation. Vivian was looking forward to this interview, eager for the opportunity to publicly establish her relationship with Marcus and begin the process of erasing Isabella from their narrative. She had no idea that she was walking into her own destruction. Everyone called one of the production assistants. We're going live in 5 minutes, as they were led onto the set. Isabella caught sight of Elena in the audience. Sitting in the front row with a small group of people Isabella didn't recognize. But she could guess who they were, Victoria's previous victims, here to witness her downfall. Dr. Chen was there too, sitting with a man Isabella assumed was the show's medical consultant. Everything was in place. "Good afternoon, America." David Sterling's voice boomed across the studio as the cameras began rolling. "I'm David Sterling, and this is Truth Revealed, the show that brings you the stories that matter. Today, we're talking about love, marriage, and success with one of New York's most prominent couples, billionaire real estate mogul Marcus Wellington and his beautiful wife, Isabella." The audience applauded warmly as Marcus and Isabella waved from their seats on the famous white sofa. Isabella placed her hand on her pregnant belly, the picture of maternal contentment. "And joining them," David continued, "is Vivian Ross, the stunning model and actress who has been working closely with Marcus on several high-profile projects. Vivian, tell us about your collaboration with the Wellington organization." Vivian leaned forward slightly, her smile radiant. "It's been an incredible experience. David, Marcus has such vision, such passion for excellence. Working with him has been transformative." The word transformative was loaded with meaning that only 3 people in the studio fully understood. Isabella, Marcus, and Vivian all knew they weren't talking about business anymore. "Now, Marcus," David said, turning to face him directly, "you've built an empire that spans multiple industries. But I understand that your greatest success has been your marriage to Isabella. Tell us about your love story." Marcus's smile was warm and seemingly genuine as he reached over to take Isabella's hand. "David, I knew from the moment I met Isabella that she was special. She's brilliant, beautiful, and the most caring person I've ever known. When I found out we were expecting our first child, I thought my life couldn't get any better." The words were perfect, exactly what his public relations team would have written for him. But Isabella could feel the slight tremor in his hand, the barely perceptible tension that suggested he wasn't as comfortable as he appeared. "Isabella," David said, "what's it like being married to one of America's most successful businessmen?" This was it. This was the moment Isabella had been preparing for. The moment when she would begin dismantling her husband's life brick by brick. "David," Isabella said, her voice clear and strong, "being married to Marcus has been educational. I've learned so much about the man I thought I knew." Something in her tone made Marcus's grip on her hand tighten slightly. David Sterling's eyes sharpened with the predatory instinct of a journalist who sensed a story about to break wide open. "Educational in what way?" David asked. Isabella smiled, and for the first time in months, it was completely genuine. "Well," she said, "I've learned that love isn't always what it appears to be. Sometimes, the people we trust most are capable of things we never imagined." The studio audience was completely silent, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Marcus's hand went completely rigid around Isabella's, his smile faltering for just a moment before he managed to recover his composure. "What do you mean by that?" "Isabella," David Sterling asked, leaning forward with the focused attention of a hunter who has spotted his prey. Isabella turned to look directly at Marcus, her expression serene despite the storm that was about to break. "I mean that 3 weeks ago, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage." "Isabella," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that only she could hear. "Maybe we should—" "No, Marcus," Isabella said firmly, never breaking eye contact with him. "I think it's time for the truth. All of it." She turned back to David Sterling, her hand moving protectively to her belly. 3 weeks ago, I found my husband's private journal, a journal where he documented his affair with Vivian Ross, his plans to divorce me after our child is born, and his intention to take our son away from me by claiming I'm mentally unfit to be a mother." The audience gasped collectively, a sound like a sharp intake of breath from a single, massive organism. Vivian's face went white beneath her perfectly applied makeup. while Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. That's... Marcus started, but Isabella wasn't finished. But that wasn't the worst part, she continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. The worst part was discovering that my husband and his mistress have been planning to kill me during childbirth and make it look like a medical complication. The studio erupted. Audience members began talking all at once, their voices rising in shock and outrage. David Sterling had to call for quiet multiple times before order was restored. Those are very serious accusations. Isabella, David said, his professionalism keeping him calm despite the explosive nature of the allegations. Do you have evidence to support these claims? I do, Isabella said simply. She reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. This contains photographs of every page of Marcus's journal, audio recordings of phone conversations between Marcus and Vivian, and documentation of their plans. She handed the USB drive to David Sterling, who immediately passed it to one of his production assistants. Within moments, the first image appeared on the large screens positioned around the studio, a page from Marcus's journal, his handwriting clearly visible to the cameras and audience. Vivian was incredible last night at the Ritz. The way she moves, the way she makes me feel, it's everything Isabella isn't. The audience's reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps, exclamations of disgust, and angry murmurs filled the air. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the studio floor. Now wait just a minute, Vivian said, finding her voice for the first time since Isabella's bombshell. This is clearly some kind of elaborate hoax, a desperate woman's attempt to... Is it? David Sterling interrupted, and Isabella could see the gleam in his eyes that had made his show famous. Because I have some interesting information about you, Ms. Ross, or should I say, Ms. Reynolds. Vivian's face went from white to gray in an instant. I don't know what you're talking about. Victoria Reynolds, David continued relentlessly. Originally from Ohio, multiple arrests for fraud and theft. At least 3 previous relationships with wealthy married men that ended with the men losing millions of dollars and their families being destroyed. As David spoke, new images appeared on the screen's mugshots, police reports, photographs of Vivian with other men who clearly weren't Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen, David announced to the audience and the millions of viewers watching at home. I'd like you to meet some people who have been very eager to speak with Miss Reynolds. Elena Rodriguez walked onto the set, followed by 3 other people, 2 women and a man, all middle-aged, all carrying themselves with the dignified bearing of people who had survived terrible ordeals. This is Elena Rodriguez, investigative journalist, David said, and with her are Mrs. Patricia Morrison, Dr. Elizabeth Blackstone, and Ms. Jennifer Ashworth. All of them have stories to tell about Victoria Reynolds. Vivian tried to stand up, but David gestured for her to remain seated. I think you'll want to hear this. Ms. Reynolds. Mrs. Morrison stepped forward first, her voice shaking with emotion but her resolve clearly unbreakable. 23 years of marriage, she said, looking directly at Vivian. 23 years, and you destroyed it all in 6 months. You convinced my husband to transfer our children's college funds, our retirement savings, everything we had worked for our entire lives. Dr. Blackstone was next. She told my husband that I was having an affair, she said, her voice bitter with remembered pain. She manufactured evidence, created fake photographs, turned him against me completely. By the time he realized what she had done, she had disappeared with $8 million and I had lost my family. Jennifer Ashworth's story was perhaps the most heartbreaking. My father was never the same after she left him, she said, tears streaming down her face. He had given her everything, his love, his trust, his fortune. When she disappeared, he tried to kill himself. We had to put him on suicide watch for 3 months. With each testimony, Vivian seemed to shrink further into herself. The confident, predatory woman who had invaded Isabella's home and planned her murder, was disappearing, replaced by someone who looked small and desperate. "Now," David Sterling said, turning back to Marcus, "let's talk about your role in all of this. Mr. Wellington, did you really plan to have your wife killed during childbirth?" Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. That wasn't, we never actually decided." "You never decided," Isabella repeated, her voice cutting through his stammering like a blade. "Marcus, I have recordings of you and Vivian discussing the details. I have documentation of your conversations with Dr. Matthews about medications that could cause complications. I have evidence of you transferring millions of dollars to offshore accounts." She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Would you like to hear the conversation where Vivian suggested that my death during childbirth would be convenient, where you agreed to consider it, Isabella?" "Please," Marcus begged, and for the first time in their entire relationship, he looked truly desperate. "You don't understand. I was confused, manipulated. I never would have actually—" "Actually what?" Isabella asked coldly. "Actually gone through with having me killed. Actually stolen our child. Actually destroyed my life for a woman who has been lying to you from the very beginning." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Elena Rodriguez stepped forward with another piece of paper. "Victoria Reynolds is married. Mr. Wellington has been for 3 years to a man named Robert Torres in Las Vegas. She never had any intention of actually being with you long term. You were just another mark, another wealthy fool she could manipulate out of his fortune." The marriage certificate appeared on the screens around the studio, complete with photographs of Vivian in a wedding dress, kissing a man who definitely wasn't Marcus. Marcus stared at the images in shock, his face cycling through emotions so quickly it was almost comical. Betrayal, rage, humiliation, and finally in the devastating understanding of how completely he had been played. "You're married?" he asked Vivian, his voice hollow. Vivian had given up all pretense now. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the cold, calculating woman underneath. "Of course I'm married," she said with a harsh laugh. "Did you really think I would tie myself to you permanently? You're pathetic. Marcus, a lonely, aging billionaire so desperate for validation that you were willing to throw away everything for a few months of attention from a woman half your age." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. Even Isabella, who had every reason to hate Vivian, felt a moment of sympathy for Marcus as the reality of his situation hit him. "But you said you loved me," Marcus whispered. "I said what you wanted to hear," Vivian replied with devastating honesty. "I said what would get me access to your money and your connections. Love, Marcus. I don't even like you. You're boring, self-absorbed, and terrible in bed. The only thing interesting about you is your bank account." The audience was completely silent now, witnessing the destruction of a man's entire worldview in real time. Marcus looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. But Isabella wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. "Dr. Chen," she called out, and her obstetrician stood up from her seat in the audience. "Would you please tell everyone what Dr. Matthews asked you about?" Dr. Chen walked onto the set with the calm professionalism of someone who had spent her career dealing with life and death situations. "Dr. Matthews approached me 3 weeks ago asking about medications that could be administered during labor to cause confusion and disorientation in new mothers. When I asked why he needed this information, he claimed it was for research purposes. But in 30 years of obstetric practice, I have never been asked such questions for legitimate medical research." She turned to look directly at Marcus. What Dr. Matthews was asking about could have seriously endangered both Isabella and her baby. It could have caused permanent neurological damage or even death. David Sterling had been in television for 20 years, but even he seemed stunned by the scope of what was being revealed. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said. "Mr. Wellington, you were planning to divorce your pregnant wife, take her child, steal her fortune, and possibly have her killed, all for a woman who is already married and was only using you for your money. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He sat there staring at his hands, the weight of his choices and their consequences finally crushing down on him. And Ms. Reynolds, David continued, you have built a career out of destroying families and stealing from people who trusted you. How many lives have you ruined? How many children have grown up without college funds because of your greed? Vivian's composure had cracked completely now. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising to near hysteria. I never had anything. I came from nothing. These people, they have everything handed to them on silver platters. Why shouldn't I take some of it? Because it doesn't belong to you, Isabella said quietly, and something in her tone made the entire studio fall silent. Because when you steal someone's money, you're not just taking numbers in a bank account. You're stealing their security, their dreams, their children's futures. You're destroying trust and love and hope. Isabella stood up slowly, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, but her dignity intact. Because when you convince a man to throw away his family for your lies, you're not just hurting his wife, you're hurting his children, his friends, everyone who ever cared about him. She turned to look at Marcus, and for a moment, her expression softened with something that might have been pity. I loved you, Marcus. I loved you completely, honestly, without reservation. I gave up my career, my independence, my entire identity to build a life with you, and you threw it all away for someone who never cared about you at all. Marcus finally looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I was crazy. I was stupid. Can you ever forgive me? Isabella studied his face for a long moment, seeing the man she had once loved buried beneath the selfish, cruel stranger he had become. Forgiveness isn't the issue, Marcus, she said finally. The issue is consequences, and consequences are exactly what you're about to face. As if on cue, several police officers entered the studio. The lead detective walked directly to Vivian, who had gone completely silent. Victoria Reynolds, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, the detective announced, producing handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Vivian's arrest was swift and efficient, but her final words as she was led away would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. You're all idiots, she screamed at the cameras, her beautiful face twisted with rage. You worship money and then act surprised when people try to take it from you. Marcus deserved everything that happened to him. As the police led her away, David Sterling turned to Marcus. Mr. Wellington, I understand that federal investigators are also very interested in speaking with you about tax evasion, fraud, and the attempted bribery of medical professionals. Marcus nodded numbly. He seemed to have aged a decade in the past hour, his confident facade completely shattered. Isabella, he said one last time, his voice broken. What can I do? How can I make this right? Isabella looked at him for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly where their son was growing strong and healthy despite everything that had happened. You can stay away from us, she said simply. You can sign over your parental rights, transfer the assets you tried to steal back to their rightful owners, and then you can disappear from our lives forever. But the baby, Marcus started. The baby deserves better than a father who would plan his mother's murder, Isabella said firmly. He deserves to grow up knowing that love means protection, not betrayal, that family means loyalty, not conspiracy, that trust is sacred, not something to be bought and sold. As the show went to commercial break, Isabella remained standing on the set, surrounded by the ruins of her old life and the foundation of her new one. She had walked into this studio as Marcus Wellington's pregnant wife, a woman whose identity was defined entirely by her relationship to a powerful man. She was leaving as Isabella Chen. She had decided to reclaim her maiden name, a woman who had single-handedly brought down one of New York's most powerful families, and exposed a criminal conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of lives. But more than that, she was leaving as a mother who had fought for her child's future and won. 2 years later, Isabella stood in the boardroom of what had once been Wellington Hotels, now rebranded as Chen Hospitality Group. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Central Park stretching out below, the same view she had once enjoyed from the penthouse that was no longer her prison. The transformation of the company had been as dramatic as her personal metamorphosis. Where Wellington Hotels had been all dark wood and masculine luxury designed to intimidate, Chen Hospitality Group was bright, welcoming, and focused on creating experiences rather than asserting dominance. "The quarterly numbers are exceptional," said James Mitchell, the man who had become both her business partner and so much more. "Occupancy rates are up 30% across all properties. Customer satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry, and we've been featured in every major travel publication as the most family-friendly luxury chain in America." Isabella smiled as she listened to the report. James had entered her life 6 months after the television appearance that had changed everything. When she was struggling to rebuild both her personal and professional life while caring for a newborn son, he had been Alexander's pediatrician first, then a friend, and eventually the love she had thought she would never find again. "The foundation numbers are even better," added Sarah Martinez, the director of the Second Chances Foundation that Isabella had established with part of the settlement from her divorce. "We've helped over 500 women rebuild their lives after domestic abuse, fraud, or abandonment. The job training programs have a 92% success rate, and our emergency housing initiative has expanded to 12 cities." Isabella felt the familiar warmth that came with knowing that her pain had been transformed into purpose. The foundation had become her life's work, proof that even the deepest betrayals could be alchemized into something beautiful. "Mama," came a voice from the doorway, and Isabella turned to see Alexander running toward her on his sturdy 2-year-old legs. He had her dark hair and eyes, but his smile was entirely his own, bright, innocent, and completely unaware of the darkness that had surrounded his birth. "Hello, my love," Isabella said, scooping him up and marveling once again at how perfectly he fit in her arms. "Did you have fun with Grandma Sarah?" Dr. Chen, who had become Grandma Sarah to Alexander and a surrogate mother to Isabella, appeared in the doorway with a smile. "He's been asking for you all morning," she said. "I think he knows today is special." Today was indeed special. It marked exactly 2 years since the Truth Revealed episode that had changed everything, and Isabella had decided to commemorate it not with sadness or anger, but with celebration. "Speaking of special occasions," James said, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, "I believe I have something that might make today even more memorable." Isabella's breath caught in her throat as James dropped to one knee in front of her and Alexander, his eyes shining with love and nervous hope. "Isabella Chen," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "you are the strongest, most compassionate, most incredible woman I have ever known. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into a force for good in the world. You rebuilt your life from ashes and created something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined." Alexander giggled and clapped his hands, apparently delighted by this unexpected entertainment. "You've shown me what real love looks like," James continued. "Not the selfish, possessive kind that demands sacrifice, but the generous, nurturing kind that helps people become their best selves. You've made me a better man, a better doctor, and a better person just by letting me be part of your life." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy, not sorrow. The contrast to her first proposal, Marcus had proposed at an expensive restaurant with a ring that cost more than most people's houses, but had been chosen by his assistant, couldn't have been more stark. "Will you marry me?" James asked, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring that somehow managed to catch and reflect all the light in the room. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Alexander and any other children we might be blessed with?" "Yes," Isabella whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her while Alexander squealed with delight, Isabella felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This wasn't the desperate, clinging love she had felt for Marcus, based on fear and insecurity and the need to be chosen. This was something deeper, stronger, built on mutual respect and shared values, and the daily choice to support each other's growth. "There's one more thing," James said as he stood up, keeping one arm around Isabella and Alexander. "I know you've been thinking about expanding the foundation internationally. Well, I've been offered a position with Doctors Without Borders that would allow us to travel together, to help people all over the world." Isabella stared at him in amazement. "You would do that? Give up your practice here?" "Isabella," James said seriously, "my practice is important, but it's not my purpose. My purpose is loving you and Alexander and helping you make the world a better place. Wherever that takes us, that's where I want to be." As they embraced, Isabella caught sight of their reflection in the boardroom windows. She saw a successful businesswoman holding her son, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, engaged to a man who saw her strength as something to celebrate rather than control. But most importantly, she saw a survivor who had refused to let betrayal make her bitter, who had chosen to transform her pain into purpose, and who had built something beautiful from the rubble of her destroyed life. The contrast to where she had been 2 years ago was so stark it almost seemed impossible. Then, she had been a woman whose entire identity was tied to a man who was planning her murder. Now, she was a woman who had created her own empire, her own family, her own legacy. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Isabella glanced down to see it was from Elena Rodriguez. "Saw the engagement announcement in the paper? Congratulations, Victoria got another year added to her sentence today for fraud charges in California. Justice is still being served." Isabella smiled and showed the message to James. Marcus had ultimately been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy, though he had been released after 3 years for good behavior. Vivian Victoria was serving a 12-year sentence and would likely face additional charges when she was released. But more importantly, the publicity from their case had led to the arrest and conviction of dozens of other con artists who had been running similar schemes. The Wellington effect, as some media outlets had dubbed it, had resulted in new laws protecting victims of romance fraud and had funded programs to help people rebuild their lives after financial exploitation. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had never found that journal?" James asked quietly. Isabella considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "I probably would have died in childbirth, and Alexander would have grown up thinking his father was a hero instead of knowing the truth about what kind of man he really was." She looked down at her son, who was now playing with the engagement ring box, completely absorbed in making it open and close. "But I think I would have found out eventually," she continued. "Marcus wasn't as clever as he thought he was, and neither was Victoria. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when people get greedy and careless." "And if you had found out later," James asked, "then I would have done exactly what I did," Isabella said firmly. "I would have fought for my son, exposed the truth, and rebuilt my life. Because that's what you do when someone tries to destroy you. You prove that you're stronger than they ever imagined." As the afternoon wore on and the business meeting transitioned into an impromptu engagement celebration, Isabella found herself thinking about the woman she had been 2 years ago. That woman had been loving, trusting, and generous to a fault. She had believed the best about people and had assumed that others shared her values of loyalty and honesty. In many ways, that woman had died the night Isabella overheard Marcus's phone call with Vivian. But what had risen from her ashes was someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Someone who had learned that real strength wasn't about avoiding betrayal, it was about surviving it and choosing to love again anyway. "Penny for your thoughts," James said, settling beside her as Alexander napped in her arms. "I was thinking about forgiveness," Isabella said. "Not forgiving Marcus or Victoria. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that, and I don't think I should, but forgiving myself for being so naive. for trusting so blindly. You don't need forgiveness for loving someone completely, James said gently. That's not a weakness, Isabella. That's a superpower. The fact that you can still love completely after what you went through, that's what makes you extraordinary. Isabella leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the security of knowing that this love was built on honesty and mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. I got a letter last week, she said quietly. From Marcus. James tensed slightly. What did it say? The same thing all his letters say. That he's sorry, that he was crazy, that he wants a chance to know Alexander. Isabella's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. I didn't read all of it. I never do. Do you think you'll ever let him see Alexander? James asked carefully. Isabella looked down at her sleeping son, his face peaceful and innocent. No, she said simply. Alexander deserves better than a father who would plan his mother's murder. He deserves to grow up believing that fathers protect their families, not destroy them. She paused and then added, but someday, when he's old enough to understand, I'll tell him the truth about what happened. I'll show him the evidence. Let him read the journal entries. Help him understand that some people are capable of terrible things, even to the people they claim to love. That's going to be a hard conversation, James observed. Yes, it will be, Isabella agreed. But it's an important one. I want Alexander to grow up understanding that love should make you feel safe, not afraid. That real love builds you up instead of tearing you down. That if someone who claims to love you is planning to hurt you, that's not love at all, that's possession. As the sun began to set over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Isabella felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain had been almost unbearable at times, the rebuilding process exhausting and frightening. But the destination had been worth every difficult step. She was no longer Isabella Wellington, the naive wife who had trusted blindly and loved without reservation. But she was also no longer the broken woman who had sat on a bathroom floor, contemplating the ruins of her life. She was Isabella Chen, CEO, philanthropist, mother, and soon-to-be wife to a man who saw her strength as beautiful rather than threatening. She was a woman who had taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into a force for justice and healing. And as she sat there holding her son and planning her future with James, Isabella realized that Marcus and Victoria had ultimately done her a favor. They had forced her to discover who she really was beneath the role of dutiful wife. And what she had found was someone far stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined. The woman who had been planning nursery decorations while her husband plotted her murder was gone forever. In her place was a woman who would never again allow anyone to define her worth or determine her destiny. And that woman was unstoppable. Later that evening, after Alexander had been put to bed and James had gone home to make arrangements for their new life together, Isabella stood alone in her penthouse, not the same one she had shared with Marcus, but a new one she had chosen and decorated entirely according to her own tastes. She walked out onto the terrace and looked out over the city that had been the backdrop for both her greatest betrayal and her ultimate triumph. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably sitting in a small apartment, wondering how his life had gone so wrong. Somewhere else, Victoria was in a prison cell, finally facing consequences for the pain she had caused. But Isabella wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the future, about the foundation that would help thousands more women rebuild their lives, about the hotels that would provide safe, welcoming spaces for families, about the little boy sleeping peacefully in his bedroom who would grow up knowing that he was loved unconditionally. She was thinking about James, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had chosen to love her not despite her strength, but because of it. She was thinking about the wedding they would plan together, the life they would build, the children they might have. Most of all, she was thinking about the woman she had become, scarred but not broken, wiser but not cynical, stronger but not harder. A woman who had learned that the most powerful revenge wasn't destruction, but transformation. That the greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies, but becoming someone they could never touch again. As she stood there in the warm evening air, Isabella smiled and spoke the words that had become her mantra over the past 2 years. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And what she had chosen to become was magnificent. The end.